All right, let's get into it. For more than 60 years, one band has pretty much written the rulebook for what it means to be a rock and roll outlaw. Seriously, they're more than just a band. They're a cultural institution, a living myth, a sound that has shaped music for decades. Today, we're going to unpack the absolutely legendary story of the Rolling Stones.
And get this, that quote isn't from some dusty archive in the 70s. That's Mick Jagger talking in 2023. Think about that. Most bands from that era are just memories, but the Stones, they're still dropping brand new albums, topping the charts, and they sound as electric as ever. It's something that absolutely no one, least of all them, ever thought would happen.
So, that's the big question, isn't it? How did a bunch of British kids who were obsessed with American music somehow become the biggest, most unstoppable rock and roll band on the planet? Well, to figure that out, we have to go all the way back to the very beginning.
Because long before the sold-out stadiums, before the screaming fans and the iconic tongue logo, it was just about the music. And for the Rolling Stones, that music came from a very specific place, an ocean away, and it would become the absolute heart and soul of everything they did. Picture this. It's the early 1960s in London. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards aren't rock stars yet, not even close. They're just these two guys who connect over a shared, passionate obsession, hunting down these rare, imported American blues records. This was music that was raw, it was real, and for a couple of kids in England, it felt a little bit dangerous.
And this wasn't just some phase they were going through. No way. They were true believers, totally infected by this sound. The band was even named after a song by the great bluesman Muddy Waters. This deep, authentic love for the blues gave them an edge, a grit that set them apart from everybody else. It was their foundation.
So they had the sound, they had the passion. But there was one tiny problem. The Beatles already owned the world. So the Stones' next move was just a stroke of pure marketing genius. They decided if you can't be the heroes that everybody loves, you become the villains everyone is secretly thrilled by.
Their manager, a guy named Andrew Loog Oldham, was brilliant. He positioned them as the exact opposite of the lovable Beatles. Where the Beatles had that friendly charm, the Stones had this simmering sexual menace. While the Beatles wore those clean, matching suits, the Stones just looked unruly, like they just rolled out of bed. It was a clear choice. Were you a Beatles person, or were you a Stones person?
And this single question, which was plastered everywhere, just says it all. It was designed to create a little bit of panic, to terrify the parents, and of course, because of that, it made an entire generation of kids fall completely in love with them. Absolutely genius.
So they'd carefully built this rebellious image, but then real-life darkness started to set in. But here's where the story takes a turn. Instead of falling apart, the band took all that turmoil, all the chaos, and the tragedy of the late 60s and channeled it into their most powerful and timeless music.
And right at the center of this storm was the band's founder, Brian Jones. You have to remember, he started this band. He named it. But as Mick and Keith's songwriting partnership took over, and as Jones's own drug problems got worse, he got pushed further and further to the side. It's just a tragic story. He was fired from the very band he created, and then, less than a month later, he was found dead. A brutal, heartbreaking end.
And in the aftermath of that tragedy, and with drug busts and just general chaos all around them, that happy psychedelic vibe of the mid-60s was gone. It was just over. Their sound got darker, it got grittier, more primal, and honestly, a little sinister.
Now, what's absolutely mind-blowing is that this period of incredible turmoil is when they released what is almost universally called the greatest four-album run in the history of rock music. Beggar's Banquet, Let It Bleed, Sticky Fingers, Exile on Main Street. I mean, come on. From Sympathy for the Devil to Gimme Shelter, they were literally taking the darkness of the world and turning it into art.
And all that darkness came to a head right here, Altamont. It was supposed to be a kind of Woodstock West, but it just devolved into pure violence. It all ended with a fan being killed right in front of the stage while the band was playing. It was a horrifying moment. Really, it was the symbolic, bloody end of the whole hippie dream.
So they survived tragedy. They survived creative highs. They survived the death of an entire era. But the most incredible part of their story might just be what came next. They just kept going. They defied every expectation to become true living legends.
You have to laugh at this quote from a young Mick Jagger. Back then, being old in rock and roll meant like 30. The whole idea of doing this for a living when you were middle-aged, let alone in your 80s, was completely absurd. No one had ever done it before. There was no playbook for it.
Over 60 years. Just think about that number. The Rolling Stones didn't just have a long career, they basically invented the idea of a long career in rock music. They became the pioneers of just sticking around, of growing old in a world that was supposed to belong only to the young.
Their endurance is just legendary. They survived the death of Brian Jones and decades later the death of their incredible drummer Charlie Watts. But that central partnership, that creative engine of Jagger and Richards, has just never broken. They invented the modern stadium tour. They're still recording vital new music. At this point, they're more than a band. They're an institution, a force of nature that just keeps rolling.
So from being these blues fanatics to becoming the ultimate anti-heroes, through all the tragedy and all the triumph, their story really is the story of rock and roll itself. Their catalog of music isn't just a bunch of songs. It's a 6-decade road trip through our culture. So the only question left for you is, where on that trip are you going to start?